This action research proposal is over communication techniques in distance learning. I am Melissa Gregory. I am a history teacher currently at Oklahoma Connections Academy, and this has been a major problem for a lot of the teachers and students at our school, especially those that enroll late. So that's the problem that we're trying to remedy. Virtual learning is becoming more popular. Everyone can agree that it's spreading and turning into more of an understood avenue for education. It's important for teachers and for students to be able to communicate effectively and quickly and know that there's 2 or 3 places where they need to go to check information instead of every single area, having to check every single area where information might be. Too many places where information gets posted creates confusion and frustration, especially for new students who are trying to get trained and figure out the system. Sometimes too much is detrimental to the training process, as well as for teachers. This wastes time, energy on both the teachers and the students, and it can cause a lot of miscommunications between the teachers and the students when teachers are saying, well, I posted that and you should have been able to see it, and students are saying, I checked all of these places and this was the one place I didn't check. If subject areas could narrow down their forms of communication to 1 or 2 places, it would save the teachers lots of time with posting information, as well as the students lots of time in looking for the information. Right now, the communication tools that are in use at Oklahoma Connections Academy include webmail, which is like an email service, live lesson attendance, which is synchronous contact at a certain time of day. It's an interactive chat room type situation with sound and video capabilities. So the interaction is synchronous. So you can visit and talk and have a conversation with the student in live lesson. Live lesson recordings are asynchronous. It's just the recording of the other students and the teachers interacting from a live lesson. Or you can record an independent live lesson and post that as well. You can post it or you can webmail the link after you publish it. Lesson modification notes is another avenue that some teachers use. You tag an actual assignment with a modification note, and then the students can check that note and see what the message is from the teacher. The only problem with lesson modification notes is if students don't know how to access them, if students are overdue on lessons and they're not accessing their lessons from their planner, they miss the lesson modification notes altogether. So it's not like it flags the assignment. That's a little bit of a flaw in the system. Message board postings is what I was talking about earlier with live lesson attendance. It's where you can post threads, comments, interactions. Students can actually comment on your threads in the message board, and you can have conversations there as well. That's considered asynchronous because you're posting, it's not live. Message board postings can be your live lessons as well. And then section message board postings, that's just for your section. So kids that are not in U.S. history cannot see my U.S. history section message board. They don't have access. You have to be enrolled in the class, and that is also considered asynchronous. Previous research. In doing this research proposal, I noticed a lot of the research, most, if not all of the research, was really targeted on the fact, number one, that students have social needs that distance learning does not accommodate. And so because of that, let's use as many avenues as possible to get the information to the students. So as many places where you can post things, the better. And that's not necessarily true when you're actually the person working in the virtual environment. Sometimes 1 or 2 places would be better for situations, as I previously mentioned. It can cause less frustration, less confusion. You don't want to have to go check 6 different places when you're looking for one piece of information. Finding the most concise form of communication is key, and I think that that would really help with social needs as well, because students would know, hey, if I'm going to go look at other kids' threads, or if I want to visit with other students, I need to go into live lesson, and that's where I'm going to interact with other students. When I need to check messages from teachers, I need to look in this place or this place. This helps with the training and the learning curve as well, like I stated earlier, for new teachers and new students. To be able to know what is what and what is the best thing to use for certain situations. So the previous research was great because it really honed in on, hey, these social needs of these students, and they're not getting this time in the hallways to visit with each other and see their teacher face to face, when we have a lot of the tools to accommodate those needs. It's just the way that we're using them may not be accommodating those needs. And that's something that we're going to have to definitely be tackling not just now, but in the future as our system gets more intricate and as digital learning becomes a bigger and bigger thing. So for this research project, I used students at Oklahoma Connections Academy in Algebra 1, U.S. History, and English 10. I did quantitative and qualitative research because I discussed with the teachers their perspectives and what communication techniques they rely on and what would happen if certain techniques were taken away or certain avenues of communication were taken away. And then crunching the data in specific subject areas. Data collection, monitoring. I monitored webmail read receipts that teachers placed on assignments. You know that the student has opened the email or the webmail when you get a notification from the read receipt. Hits on the message boards are documented. Only problem with that is you don't know if it's the same kid going 3 or 4 times, or if it's 3 or 4 different kids. So that's the only hitch there, variable. Live lesson attendance, which is also easily found within our data, and then live lesson recordings that are posted to the message board in their own threads, looking at those hits. So here is the data based on communication methods. So the first method was webmail. So in Algebra 1, 101 students were sent. So that's how many were given the opportunity to look at the webmail. And then those are the ones that opened. So as I was doing my research, when I looked at the data from by communication method, it didn't tell as much of a story as when I looked at it by subject area. So this looks pretty average. This is what I would guess it would be. And here's live lesson attendance, which is interesting because Algebra 1 is much higher, but if you think about the fact that Algebra 1 is a systems class, it's a procedural class. You have to learn how to do the math problem, and you need to see somebody do it. U.S. History, not the case. If you're going to miss the U.S. History live lesson, you can just go watch the recording or find the information. Same with English 10. If you don't make it, it's not like you've missed a procedure. You're talking more about facts, cause and effect, and those type of things. Live lesson attendance. This one was interesting. Once again, like procedural, Algebra 1, the math class, and then U.S. History and English, pretty comparable. Message board content. The number of hits for Algebra 1 is less because more of the kids are going to their live lessons or accessing their live lesson recordings and not the other content, because most of the Algebra 1 content posted on the message boards is for procedural things. U.S. History and English 10, way higher numbers because we're posting test prep material, facts, procedure, how to do certain portfolios. It's not the same setup in our classes as it is in the Algebra 1 class. Lesson modification notes. This was another fascinating one. Algebra 1, I did not know this. Algebra 1, the math class, uses lesson modification notes on a regular basis. So their students are constantly looking for lesson modification notes that can easily be missed. But those notes are far more frequent than in U.S. History and English 10. So in English 10 and U.S. History, they're just going through their lessons, and the odds of them running into a lesson modification note is far slimmer than in algebra, because things are changed in algebra because of the procedural. Okay, here it is by subject area. This was really interesting to me. This was where I found the answer in my research. Not the answer I was looking for, but I found a different answer. So this is like which subject areas depend on which communication methods the most. So this is really neat. English 10, as you can see, is going to rely way more on message board content and webmails. So if you took those two forms, and those are the two forms of communication I thought would be the most prominent. Well, for English 10, they are. English 10 doesn't rely on lesson modification notes, and they don't really rely on their live lessons. They're sending their information out through webmail, and they're posting it to their message boards, and that's where the kids go to look for information in that class. U.S. History, same thing. Message board content, webmails. That's where most of the students are getting their information, because there's really not a right or wrong procedure in those classes. English more so than U.S. History because they're writing papers. But once again, you can post tips and tricks for your MLA style on the message board and in your webmails if you need to relay that information to your students. And then here's the algebra class, which is not the same. Lesson modification notes and live lesson recordings are the most important forms of communication for them. So this led me to the conclusion that the entire school doesn't need to narrow down their communication methods. The subject areas do. Then you could say to your students, hey, you're my algebra student. This is where you go look for algebra information. These are the two most important things that you need to be doing. And that can help the students prioritize where they're spending their time and their energy. And that can also help the teachers prioritize where they're spending their time and their energy. Because while this is the number of hits, teachers are doing every one of these communication methods with every single piece of content. So when I looked by the communication technique, I was really like a little bit disappointed that I didn't see more. And then when I looked by subject area, there it was. There was the answer, which was totally different than what I thought it was going to be. Um, Different subject areas rely on different methods, but this does help. And these teachers were glad to know this because we found a way. Okay, those classes next year are going to really hone in on those two communication techniques instead of using every single method, telling every kid to use every single method. The subject areas are going to be honed down to save time for the teachers and the students and frustration. All methods of communication are still needed at this school, should still be able to access. And like I said, subject areas can narrow it down. All forms should be available. And next year, we're going to implement within the high school PLC, we're going to implement, we're going to include science this time and say you need to narrow it down and figure out your two top forms of communication. And let's really hone in on those and see if it makes a difference in how many kids are opening our webmails and going to our live lessons and accessing that information and using it and not calling us completely lost. So here are my references as well for all the information that I used in this research project.